Hello, my construction masters. And in this video, we're going to have a look at one half of performance securities. And when I say performance securities, I'm talking about bonds and parent company guarantees. And in a future video, we'll cover parent company guarantees, but this video is all about bonds. So firstly, let's have a review of the definition of a bond and look at some key issues such as calling on the bond and safety and security. A bond is an arrangement where a contractual duty owed by one party to another is backed up by a third party. Bonds are a means of protection against the non-performance of the contractor. They are an undertaking by a bondsman or surety to make a payment to the client in the event of non-performance of the contractor. And if you did not know what a bondsman is, they are someone who assumes the responsibility of a bond, and the bondsman could be a professional agent, possibly acting for an insurance company. They could be an agency, or they could be a corporation who takes responsibility for another person's obligations by signing a bond. But normally, bonds are provided by a financial institution, for example, a bank, for a premium cost. And we will see why in a minute. The actual cost of the bond is usually borne by the contractor, although this is likely to be reflected in the contractor's tender price, obviously. This means that the contractor will increase his tender prices by the price of the bond. Okay, let's imagine for a minute, what would happen if you needed to activate the bond and the bondsman did not have the money? That takes us to calling on the bond. So, whichever form a bond is required, the first key issue for the beneficiary of the bond, and the beneficiary is either the employer or the contractor, is to make sure that if there is a need to call on the bond, the bondsman has sufficient assets to honor it. You get me? You're with me? And therefore, historically, it's for this reason that a bond was provided by a financial institution, such as a bank, bondsman, or insurance company. Because they were the most reliable and most likely to have the money available when called upon. And if you remember the credit crunch in 2008, which was basically an economic situation where financial institutions like a bank reduced their lending and tightened up the requirements for obtaining a loan, which basically meant that loans were less available and it was much harder to loan money. Then you would also realize how important it was to consider just how secure a bank, a bondsman, or insurance company guarantee might actually be. Okay, so moving on, let's have a look at on-demand or default bonds. And what this means is that default bonds require that the client provides evidence that the contractor has not performed their obligations under the contract and that they have suffered a loss as a consequence. The benefit of this is that the bond can release funds to the beneficiary to appoint an alternative contractor or subcontractor at the time when disaster strikes. On the flip side, under an on-demand bond, the employer does not have to prove default. This is, however, provided that he can show that he has complied with the conditions for demanding the bond, then the employer can call on it, easy peasy. And please note that this is also a reason that bonds are provided by a financial institution like a bank, as they are seen as the most secure and stable. And also, they're the most likely to have the funds available to release the funds if disaster strikes. I hope you're with me. And now for some points around safety and security. Investors can be wary of funding construction projects due to the exposure to different types of risks. Bonds, guarantees, and warranties offer some security from risks such as breach of contract and insolvency. In cases of breach of contract, where the contractor has failed to comply with its obligations to complete the works in accordance with the building contract, performance bonds offer a secure fund from which an employer can draw. And this is in the same way a parent company guarantee can lower the risks to an investor in the event of insolvency. Okay, so now we know what a bond is, where you can get a bond from, and that bonds can be either on demand or default. Let us now move on to what bonds are used for. So you would use a bond for three main reasons. Number one, if the contractor is new or unapproved. Number two, to protect the interests of a one-off developer. And three, where a bond is thought appropriate to the risks of the project, meaning that if the risks of a project are high, then a bond can lower that risk and make the project feasible enough to carry out. And please note that if you were to use a bond, the bond must be in writing, and it is common for the bond to be a deed, and the bond will contain a duration and a financial limit. So just for your information and really quickly, let me tell you what a deed is. And contracts can be signed as a deed or as an underhand, which is also known as simple contracts. Both types have different limitation periods. The deed has a 12-year limitation period, and simple contracts have a 6-year limitation period. We cover these in a lot more detail in other videos, but just for now, know that bonds therefore usually have a 12-year limitation period, as it is common for a bond to be a deed. Amazing. So that was an introduction into bonds, and I hope that was really helpful and useful for you guys. If you've got any questions, as always, email me, hilan@constructionmastery.com. Until next time, stay safe and see you soon.